your pay scale has looked like from like a new grad to where you are now?
In private practice, you will start anywhere from...
Do you think that there are certain people who should not be therapists?
Absolutely.
How do you feel like AI will replace or not replace the social work field and careers?
I love that question.
Welcome to the Social Work HQ channel, the channel where we talk about all things social work, whether you're just interested in it, whether you're a student, new grad, or a seasoned social worker looking to pivot careers. This channel is supposed to help you figure out what you want to do without guessing. I'm Mandy Wilcox. I'm an ER social worker. Each episode, I interview social workers in different careers and roles so that you can see what that role really looks like and if you will enjoy it and be good at it. We talk about pay scale. We talk about career paths and pivoting. So let's jump into today's episode. We've got Shanna Call. She's a therapist along with a lot of other side social work gigs that she's doing. And she actually got into social work later in life after working in the special education field earlier in her career. So first I wanted to start, I looked a little bit into your background and I believe you started in special education. That's what you originally went to school for. And you've been a therapist. You went to social work school later in life. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I originally did schooling in special ed and worked in the field for a couple of years before I had my first baby. And then I was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years, about 16 before I decided to go back. And by that time, life had changed. I had so many different experiences and special ed wasn't there wasn't a place for me there anymore. So I decided to do social work and then got my bachelor's and master's after that.
That's great. I feel like when I was in school and even today, I feel like I see a lot of women who have gone back to social work or other areas, but especially social work after having a break from a career, being a stay-at-home mom. And do you feel like that was difficult for you to get back into your career in social work?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to go back to school and I always wanted to pursue a career. It was more about a matter of timing. And by the time I went back to school, we'd had so many life experiences in our own family that kind of ran adjacent to social work, where we kind of dabbled with some family issues where social work was involved. And we went through like a couple of issues with adoption too, where social work was involved. And so it felt really natural going back into that because a lot of our experiences had just kind of made me familiar with the work and also built a sense of, I guess, for lack of a better word, like, I don't know how to say it, but it just felt really natural. It felt like that's kind of what I was being led to do.
Yeah, sounds like you were kind of drawn to that after your personal experiences and what you had personally gone through.
Yeah. And honestly, in my work now, I've met several women who are in a similar situation. They want to get back into the school or into a career and have had similar experiences where they feel like their life has led them adjacent to social work as well. So it feels natural for them to kind of pursue that same route.
Yeah. Do you feel like in those experiences that you had, if you're willing to share, did you have any specific experiences with social workers that you really feel like inspired you and really kind of that was the switch that got you interested in social work?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So when we had our fourth baby, there was a family search being done from the state of Oregon, and they were looking for a family member to adopt a boy who'd been in the foster care system up in Oregon, and we were part of this extended family. And so we at first were really resistant to it because we just brought our fourth baby home and we just had a very busy full life, but we eventually felt like we could try to bring him and integrate him into our home. And so we did. We went through all the adoption classes, worked with 2 states, case managers, guardian ad litem, like many people involved in the social work world. And once he came to our home, he needed intensive therapy. He had been found like drinking meth water. That's how his mom like made him sleep and be quiet. And so he had a lot of disabilities. He was fetal alcohol, very delayed in speech. He was a big boy, a big 3-year-old, like a husky little guy, but he had no social skills. He couldn't feed himself. So he was very, very behind in development. And so we worked closely with speech therapists, doctors, a whole team of professionals and experts who were trying to help this little guy. And eventually we ended up doing some family therapy because he was having some attachment issues. And so that family therapist was integral in helping us navigate first the system with adoption, secondly, the complexity of his issues and what we were dealing with, and help give us some autonomy and some choices on how to navigate that, and then also how to integrate him into our family.
Mm-hmm.
And so due to a series of events, both teams in both states decided that him being in a home with other children probably wasn't the best placement for him. So he ended up going back to Oregon and being adopted by an amazing family whose kids had all grown so that he could get some really intensive personal care there. So it was heartbreaking for us, but it was also life-changing. Our life took a completely different route than we were expecting. And there were many social workers and therapists involved that we probably would not have made it through like we did without their help. So that was something that was really a key factor in my decision to go back to social work as well.
Yeah, what an amazing experience, and also very difficult, I'm sure. It sounds like that was definitely at a time in your life where you couldn't really take a lot more onto your plate, but you did, and I'm sure it taught you a lot in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For better or worse, sometimes we're like, what were we thinking? But other times we knew like we wanted to do the best we could for him, and we really
Yeah.
feel like we did. And it was a gift for him and for us as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know, so you work full-time as a therapist now, and then kind of part-time or as needed in the ER at the hospital. Did you always plan on being a therapist, or did you have other goals in social work?
That's so funny. You're hitting on all the points that like were really relevant for me. I did not. I planned on doing child welfare because of our experience. I was very set on doing child welfare, and kind of through the schooling process and learning, like doing some of the clinical training, I realized that working for the government was not on my bingo card. I did not want to be kind of tied down by that. And also I felt like because of all the restrictions working for a government entity, it didn't feel like I could do as much good as if I was working more with an individual. So I decided to go more micro than macro. And there are days where I'm still kind of like in shock. Like, how did I get here? This was never on the trajectory for me. I never planned on doing this.
Mm-hmm. So did you start out when you first graduated with your MSW? Did you first start out in therapy and you've just stayed since then, or have you had any other positions in your career?
Yeah, so I went right into private practice and did that for a couple years before I started to explore medical social work. So then I got the position at the hospital in the emergency room working as a social worker, care manager. And then I also got a lot of specialized training in trauma and grief. And so I work a little bit in the hospice area as well. I do a little bit of medical social work with hospice patients and run some grief groups and caregiving groups kind of as needed too. I'm a co-facilitator when they need someone to step in. And then a couple of the mortuaries in the Valley are looking at starting more consistent grief groups for some of their families. And so I'm kind of on the top list to help facilitate that as well.
Okay, that's great. It sounds like you have a lot of different experiences right now within social work. What do
Yeah.
you think is the one skill, if you can name one, that really helps you kind of jump from each of these different roles? Because all of them are a little bit different, but they're all within the social work realm.
That's a good question. Um, the foundational clinical skills of being able to give reflective listening, validation, unconditional positive regard, I think is a really big one to no matter what role you're playing in the social work world, to be able to meet the person where they're at without expectation of wanting to like push and pull them along or expect things from them that they're not able or capable of doing. So I think that's a constant practice to meet people exactly where they're at and to adjust. Sometimes it feels like a mental marathon or sprint back and forth because in a single day doing therapy you can meet with somebody going through some of the like hardest trauma that you can hear and then switch to the next session and it's maybe something more arbitrary like a roommate fight or something, right? And so there's kind of a mental adjustment that needs to be made in that area, but being able to meet someone where they're at and be very present with them with where they're at, I think is a foundational skill. That's in hospice too. You see families who are in every range of dysfunctional and very functional, and it's not my job to go in and like fix the system, but to more like focus in on where they need me in that moment.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think as I've realized that in my social work roles as well, I have also noticed how much that belief is not in our society. I feel like we all have these expectations for ourselves or even for other people. When you think about what we teach to our clients every day, it's that they're oftentimes going through really difficult things. They're doing their very best, and you have to accept them where they're at and what they can do in that moment. And yet, we look at ourselves or some other people sometimes, and I think all of society has a hard time not judging themselves and expecting more of themselves. I think there's a constant state of burnout.
Yeah,
It's kind of an epidemic, I think, these days. So,
absolutely. And I think even as social workers and therapists, we're very prone to that as well. Like we're prone to really being hard on ourselves, wondering if we're doing any good. It's hard to meet ourselves where we're at in our own development as well.
yeah. What do you think is the one thing that prepared you most for being a social worker, whether that was something you learned in school or something that you've just learned throughout your life?
It's a good question. Honestly, it feels like it came very naturally for me. So there was nothing, I think maybe I struggled in the areas of like nitpicking, like maybe double-barreled questions or like things that don't ask yes or no questions, like being able to expand those skills. But as far as like the foundational skills of being very validating, being very empathetic, those came very naturally. And I see probably the best social workers are very empathetic, sensitive people who maybe at one point in their life thought that that maybe wasn't a positive thing, that it was maybe a negative thing, that they felt so much that they took on other people's feelings at times or things like that. And so I think those are the people who make the most natural, effective social workers because they have such a personal connection to the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that, which I think also brings up another big struggle with that a lot of social workers have is sometimes getting too involved with their clients. And like we always say and hear and learn is that you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves, and you can't do more than that person's willing to do for themselves. And it can be easy, I think, in the social work field to overextend yourself and I mean, we do feel for our patients and clients, and a lot of people, I think it's important to have those boundaries with your clients. And for people who already are feeling so deeply for others, it can be easy for us as clinicians to
Absolutely.
lose something. Yeah.
Yeah, we are helpers at heart. And so if we have someone needing help or like needing an extra session time or something, it's really, really easy to cross that boundary because what leads us to social work is wanting to help people. And what burns us out the quickest with social work is wanting to help people. So like trying to find that good balance and those boundaries that work for you is I think a constant practice, being able to like assess for yourself where you're at and what you need.
Yeah. That being said, I think that from what I've heard about being a therapist, and I've been a therapist for brief periods of times in the past, I think that there's a lot of stigma around therapists having to work so much because maybe they're not getting paid as much as they should. But I've heard that a good therapy caseload is like 30 patients a week, 30 clients a week, or somewhere around there. But oftentimes, therapists may have to take on more clients to pay their bills or whatnot to make ends meet for themselves. But I think that that can also lead into a big issue of burnout. Do you see that at all in your work or in any of your colleagues or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the research tells us that after you've done 6 sessions, especially consecutive sessions in a day, your efficacy as a therapist starts to decrease.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to be that present and be that effective for that long. And so anything over about 6 hours a day, you're compromising your ability to have those foundational skills and do effective therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right in the fact that it's a very underpaid profession and underappreciated profession. And there's still many insurance companies that don't acknowledge the value of a session. They don't pay out the appropriate amount of money. It's just not quite as evolved as we want it to be when it comes to the value of the work that we do. And so it's very hard to make a living if clinical therapy is your only job. So you see a lot of therapists really overextending themselves, making those exceptions for extra sessions, trying to make ends meet, having double jobs because one doesn't cover the full scope of what they need financially. And so it is very easy to burn out because it's not just a normal job. It also takes about double the emotional load that a typical job would take too. And so that's something that I think isn't quite as valued either as the toll that it takes on the therapist. And so that's part of that undervaluing the profession.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's an argument going around that a lot of people feel that the social workers and therapists who don't accept insurance and maybe charge $200 to $300 a session is it's not very open to people who are in lower socioeconomic statuses, and social work is supposed to be all about equality. But also as a social worker, and we have MSWs, we're clinically trained. A lot of people also believe that we should be charging for our worth. What is your opinion on kind of where that line is, and whether, is it ethical to charge those high amounts and not accept insurance, or because we're in a profession where we're supposed to be helping those people that may be down on their luck, should we just be accepting insurance and not be charging those high amounts?
Yeah. Oh man, this is something that I kind of wrestle with often because there is kind of this ethical consideration to take that we as social workers are kind of bound to serve the underserved communities and to be able to look at the systems and be able to understand where people are at and where they're coming from and why they're functioning the way that they're functioning. So yeah, I do have some ethical wrestle with it because absolutely we have the schooling and the clinical training that's very valuable, and logistically we should be compensated for that. And I think it's okay that we believe that and that we feel that and that we advocate for that. And we're living in a reality where that's not the case. And so being able to find a balance with that is hard because I currently stay at the office that I'm at because 90% of my clients are insurance pay. If I were to leave that clientele, I would filter out a lot of the clients who need therapy the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I take a lower pay and I stay in that setting because I feel very ethically bound to that. But I also am constantly looking for a way to like find my value in this profession. How do I advocate and also appreciate that? So it's kind of a dichotomy where we have to live with both realities. And I think everybody falls in a different place with that. I am privileged enough to have a 2-income home where my husband has insurance and kind of gives us that foundation. And so that makes it possible for me to be able to take this lower pay and to be able to honor that kind of community that I'm serving. But not everybody has that same privilege. And so it's hard to make a judgment call on that.
Yeah, I definitely think it kind of falls on maybe personal values in addition to the social work values and kind of determining what is going to work best for your life. Because as much as all of us would love to serve all the clients that need the help the most, there are social workers who are in a position where they have to accept the higher paying jobs or can't accept insurance or whatnot because they can't make ends meet in that way. And so I think it is a very personal decision. And there's so many aspects that go into making that decision as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're in no position to judge somebody who takes a different route there because it really does depend on their personal values, their life circumstances, and the lifestyle that they live. But it is kind of an ethical and moral wrestle sometimes to how we honor both those social work values and our personal values.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say do you think is the biggest misconception about being a therapist?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. It's so funny because as therapists, we're like as cliche as it gets and not. So I think there's a big misconception that a lot of it's you sit on a couch and the therapist just reflects back over and over and how do you feel and how do you feel, right? And that we kind of go around in loops with just talk therapy. So I think there's a really big misconception about what therapy actually is, and that there's maybe a lack of education and understanding about how empirical the modalities and interventions we use are and what the efficacy is there, because it does take a lot of training to be able to apply those kinds of modalities in a very ethical and effective way. So I think there's a big misconception about a lot of people just talk about, I don't want to just go talk about my problems. Like we're just going to loop around in circles. But if that's what's happening, then there's a big failing in what's happening in that therapy space. So there's a lot of people who don't believe therapy works because they haven't had a personal experience with it. And a lot of people who may have had bad experiences with therapists who are not applying their training in a very empirical way, and it hasn't been very effective. And so there's a lot of stigma around that too.
Yeah. On that note, what do you think how much of therapy is a good clinician and how much of therapy is the client they're willing to change their lives? Because like we talked about earlier, a client, they have to be willing to change things, usually just talking about them. Sometimes talking through emotions and experiences can be helpful, but ultimately, usually you're changing thought processes or you're changing actions or relationships and behaviors and the way they think about things. So how much, I guess, do you think being a therapist is related, a positive therapy experience? Is it more related to a good clinician or a client that is open and willing to change?
That's such a great question. I recently heard some research that said 15% of the efficacy of therapy actually comes through the modality and the intervention and how a therapist applies it, where the other 85% is coming from the therapeutic alliance and the ability to build safety with a client who then feels more empowered to go do the work, to apply what they're learning in therapy. And so a big part of what makes therapy effective is the clinician's ability to connect with that client and to provide that space, that validation that they need, the safety that their nervous system needs to finally like feel ready to make changes in their life. And that's on the clinician's part, right? The client has to kind of close that gap in what they're willing to do outside of session, because 1 hour is not enough to make a new skill stick or to really solidify a new kind of frame that they're looking at their life through. It has to be consistent practice. And so you see the most effective progress when a client is willing and ready to go do that work on their own, and the clinician is able to apply their skills in a way that really connects and meets their needs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's something, at least I learned a lot in school, was, the biggest part of therapy and connecting, the biggest part of your success with a client will be your connection with the client and how you can build that rapport with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I heard a supervisor say once that every clinician has the same training and modality, but it's your personal ability to apply it with the client that you're in that room with. When you see what their needs are and how to connect with them, that's what's going to make therapy happen.
In regards to efficacy of treatment and the success of your treatment, do you think, I've heard a lot of complaints from people that they believe that someone should have to get a doctorate or more education than just a master's degree to be a therapist? What is your view or take on that?
That's a good question. I think I'm not exactly sure how much more schooling would do as far as like the training process. Like once you learn those skills and you learn the modality, you're already required to do 3,000 hours. I can't remember how many hours it is. 3,000 hours, and it's changed over time. So I'm not sure what it's at now, but over 3,000 hours of practicing that under supervision, where somebody is actually like monitoring they're reviewing your notes, they're making sure you're applying interventions effectively. So I don't know how much schooling would be as helpful as the actual practice of it is. That's invaluable in this profession, is getting that personal face-to-face experience and refining those skills in a very safe and controlled way. We could study for years more the same things, psychology, modalities, research. We have a good foundation for that. The training gives us a really good training on how to be able to filter out what's empirical and what's not, research-based interventions and modalities and applications of them. And then it's up to practicing. So unless you're going to go do medication management or you truly want to specialize with a very niche specialization in this field, I don't know that education is going to do a whole lot more than what the actual practice does.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think even those new grads who are obtaining those 3,000 to 4,000 hours that they have to do, they are, like you said, under strict supervision. And so even though there may be those clients or people who believe that they shouldn't be a practicing therapist, they are being supervised by a therapist who has worked for years and has gone through all those hours of work and schooling. And so yes, they may be a new grad, but it doesn't mean they're flying by the seat of their pants and doing their own thing.
Yeah. And even by the time they graduate, how many videotaped and shadowed sessions have they done? Like there's only so much that you can do, like imaginal and practice rather than experienced. And so, yeah, I think there is a lot of personal growth that comes to those 3,000 hours in like how you apply and how you use your sense of self as a therapist. Mm-hmm. So as far as learning those skills, those come naturally, and we learn those very quickly, and then we just practice them. So yeah, I think you're right on that. School, like people can argue that, and there can be some validity to that, but it's the experience and the practice that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I would add that as a new grad or student, whether you're in an internship or just graduated and in your first job, picking your supervisor and making sure that you have vetted your supervisor is very important, because they are the ones who are going to kind of lead you into your career and make sure that you are ethical and practicing appropriately in the social work field.
Oh, I agree with that 1,000%. Your supervisor becomes your mentor and becomes kind of the voice in your head as you're a new baby therapist, in like how to navigate situations, and to be able to have a therapist that you feel a personal connection with is very much like a therapist client relationship, where you have that alliance together. You have that rapport where you can build trust and safety. That's what allows you to grow as a therapist and as a human. And so vetting your therapist or vetting your supervisor is a really big deal. I've had great supervisors, and I've had supervisors I've outgrown really quickly, maybe because they've been in the field for a long time and they're very set in their set of skills. So being able to like recognize when you need to change or when you need more growth, being able to advocate for yourself in that area is a big deal too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there are certain people who should not be therapists? They would not be a good fit for them.
Absolutely. Yes. It's hard to it's hard to put a blanket statement out there on who shouldn't, but if you're seeking to be a therapist to maybe gratify yourself because you're like, oh, I've lived through this, I'm now an expert of this, and I want to help other people with that.
Mm.
That's very different than, oh, I've learned a lot of things and I have this empathy and I really want to help people navigate that. There's a big difference in gratifying what your needs are versus being able to meet someone else in their needs. And so you see that often. I mean, it comes in a spectrum. There are therapists out there who have a range of personality disorders and their own kind of mental health issues that they're working with. So really doing the work up front to confront your own biases, your own transference and countertransference, where you're recognizing that and feeling that is so important because it is way too easy to let your own issues seep into the therapy room because it becomes very relatable. And that's where we have the potential to do harm, is when we've now changed that relationship and that dynamic.
Yeah, that's what I would agree. I was going to mention transference is probably the biggest risk when someone comes into being a therapist due to their own past experiences. And I know when I was in school, I learned a lot about how therapists should be a complete blank slate. Would you agree? And I've heard a lot of arguments, younger therapists who are just graduating maybe say that, if my client asks me specific questions, I'm not just going to dodge all of the questions and say that they can't know anything about me because I'm not supposed to share anything with them. What is your opinion on kind of how much of a blank slate are you supposed to be as a therapist?
Oh, I have opinions on this. I have lots of thoughts on this, mainly because I'm a very humanistic therapist. I take that approach that we are two humans in the same room together. And I always confront that right up front to say, look, I'm over here on my mountain trying to navigate my own obstacles and trials over here, but I have some training to be able to see what's happening on your mountain over here. So please know that just because I'm on this side of the room, that I don't have everything figured out, and I'm never going to be the expert of your life, and I'm never going to have the same experiences as you. So just kind of setting out that like we're both human people navigating some real challenges, and then also setting the stage for, we're not here for me. I'm here to be in a space with you and to help you navigate this. But I'm also happy to have you know me as a human. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to be a robot. That's not how we build rapport. That's not how we build a therapeutic alliance. So there is so much maturity in knowing what to share about yourself, when to share it, and how to share it. Is it going to further the therapeutic relationship? Is it going to interfere with our progress? Is it coming from a place of transference? Like it takes a lot of maturity to recognize there is a place for keeping yourself out of it and like not crossing that boundary. And there's a place for being able to like bridge that gap and be a real person together. So that's one of those things that's really important to practice in those 3,000 hours is to how to be a human in that room and how to be yourself, because you are bringing your sense of self to this relationship, and that's what's going to bring them back to you.
Yeah. And I think the more you learn about each client, the more you may learn, one thing might be appropriate to share with one client that may not be with another client due to their past experiences or what has happened in their life, I think, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we run a strange risk here in northern Utah, and I think throughout the state of Utah, because there's such a religious emphasis in this area and in this demographic. And so you get a lot of tricky situations to navigate when you're dealing with religious or non-religious people. So I think anywhere outside of the state, it would be so unethical to disclose your religion or your whatever religious ties you have. But here, people are really seeking to find an alliance with people who align in that area with them. And so
Mhm.
that's a tricky thing to know how much you're going to share there, how much you're going to be honest, and how that's going to impact the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely religion and politics is something that
Politics
oftentimes
is
comes
really
up. Yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah, for sure. What do you think is the most stressful part about being a therapist, um, compared to other social work jobs?
Hmm. Personally, for me, it's to set that therapist hat down and come home and be a mom, and to kind of switch that um, that role really quickly in a period of time. And so I think whatever role we're switching out of as a therapist, once you leave that therapy room, you are kind of setting down that hat and you're putting on another one, whether it's wife, whether it's mother, whether it's another job, whether it's you're a creative artist or something, right? There's so many different hats that we wear. But
Mhm.
that, like, setting that kind of therapeutic hat down is really hard. Like, it's a hard thing to switch out of. I have to make sure that I take time to, like, process everything that's happened in the day, but that doesn't always happen in my 10-minute drive home. And then I have to go be on and make dinner and deal with all the things that come with having a family. But that's hands down one of the most difficult things that comes with a therapist, is that you're experiencing so much in a day. Sometimes you're experiencing secondhand trauma. Sometimes you are in a grief room with somebody. Sometimes you're just going through so much in a day because you're very present with your clients and you don't have the time to process that in real time. And so just because the clock ends and you're on your way home, your emotions don't have anywhere to go. And so being able to find a way to process that and honor everything that you've been feeling in a day is a really hard part of the job.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I was taught in school was self-care, and they really hound that into us in school. And I don't think any of us realize as students how big of a deal it is until we get into the social work field and we realize how much social workers do carry on a daily basis.
Yeah. I can tell you we don't have a single staff meeting at my clinical office that doesn't include everybody going around the room and talking about what they've done for self-care that week, because it's so significant. You have to take time and you have to be a little selfish here. If you're a mom, if you're a wife, you have other jobs, whatever you're doing, you have to take time to care for yourself. Otherwise, you cannot be the effective therapist that you want to be. You're going to be burned out. You're not going to like this job. You're not going to have the mental capacity to do it. So that self-care is so important. And it comes in so many different shapes and forms. It's not always just like take a bubble bath at the end of the day. It takes
Yeah.
consistent practice to know what you need on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different for every person. And what a fantastic thing that your workplace does that. I think that's another great thing for new grads to be looking into is when they're looking for a new job out of school or even just an internship, asking those questions of, what does work-life balance look like here? Do you guys value self-care and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yes, please take time to honor that and start practicing now, long before you're at the point of burnout. Once
Mhm.
you're at that point, it's really hard to come back from. So make it something that you practice frequently and often.
Yeah. Would you say that that is probably the biggest cause of burnout in therapists is just either overworking themselves, taking on too many sessions, or not practicing that self-care and what kind of grounds them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. That is a surefire way to burn out, is if you're not doing self-care and you're not honoring those boundaries of where you're at, what your personal bandwidth is with your work-life balance.
Yeah. Um, what do you think growth looks like, career growth looks like for a therapist? In my mind, I see, you can continue being a therapist. You could maybe supervise other therapists. You could open your own practice, maybe open a group practice and hire other therapists. What do you think for those looking into being a therapist? What does that career growth look like for them?
Yeah, I think you named a lot of it right there. A lot of grads coming out of school, I understand, take um, scholarship opportunities or grant opportunities where they have to work for so long in a nonprofit. And if you're going to work in that kind of setting, you're not going to be paid very much. But you're going to do your time and you're going to learn a lot of things in that setting. And then you might transition to a private practice where there's insurance pay or a mixed group of like LMFTs, LCSWs, things like that. And then it's very natural, once you have that training, to look at doing some supervision to other clients and mentoring other therapists and mentoring them. And then kind of the next step is looking at what your own private practice would look like. Do you decide to do private pay? Do you decide to have your own office and your own LLC and do your own billing and things like that? And there's a lot of people who, for them, that feels like a really great step. And there's a lot of therapists who want to stay under the umbrella of a clinic who offers multi services to clients.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's kind of this progression, and then there's a handful of therapists who do value going on and maybe opening their own group practice where they maybe have like more mixed services and skills there too. So that's, as far as the therapist path goes, that's kind of the progression.
Mhm.
Um, but then also in the profession of social work, like we talked about before, if you have a personal value of having a lot of variety in your work, or you find yourself getting burned out in one area, there are lots of different areas to explore with that, to maybe add something that gives you more of a teamwork kind of environment. Clinical therapy can be really lonely because the most interaction you get in a day is passing each other in the hall or seeing each other in the bathroom between sessions, and there's not a lot of time to process or to connect on a personal level. So if that's something that you need is more of a teamwork vibe, more of like an interdisciplinary group, there's lots of areas where you can get that too. So it really depends on what your personal growth looks like and what your values are with that.
Yeah. What's your opinion on therapists who just kind of accept every patient and therapists who specialize?
Mhm.
There is argument that if you're a therapist who accepts everyone, you maybe aren't as good of a therapist because the best therapists are the ones who specialize, which I don't know if that's necessarily true, but what's your opinion on that?
I would say in the beginning, as a new grad, be willing to take on whatever comes at you, like a variety and a depth of clients, so that you can get some skill and some competency in lots of areas.
Mhm.
That's foundational, is to be confident no matter who you're seeing, you have some competency there. But it's only natural, and I think that's kind of that personal progression that you're looking for. It's very natural to start finding what kind of demographic you connect with most, where you specialize the most. If you're really drawn to trauma, to get a lot more training in that area, that's where CEUs become really valuable, is you get to choose where you continue your education. So you can get specialty training in any area. So there's a lot of people who will do that, but it's also helpful to be an expert in some things, a handful of things, mostly for yourself. So there's an area you feel really confident in, to be like, I got this. Like, I know what I'm doing here. So you're not constantly feeling like an imposter. But I would say, get competency and experience in a variety of things, and then find where you're naturally most pulled towards to specialize in or get extra training in, because I guarantee you'll have people looking for whatever you're specializing in.
Yeah. Do you think that specializing in something, so I know that a lot of social workers who are thinking about therapy, one thing that they hear a lot is that it takes forever to fill a caseload. Um, and I think that kind of depends on, whether you take insurance, what your prices are, and if you specialize in something. Would you agree that, and I guess I'd like to hear your experience on how filling your caseload, how long that took for you, and what your opinion is on how long it takes to fill a full caseload.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Um, a big part of that is, right off the bat, what kind of clinic are you working with? Where are you getting those supervision hours? Because some of that, like if you're working for a bigger clinic, you don't have to work too hard to get new clients. Like they're just going to provide it. It might be a well-known clinic in the area, and people are willing to call and be like, hey, what therapist will fit with my needs here? So it depends on where you're working. If you're working for a small practice and there's maybe only a couple of therapists with a couple of specialties, it's definitely going to take longer. You have to market yourself in some sense. Like, I think it's very valuable to have maybe your own social media that kind of markets what your skills are and shows that you're confident in some areas. I don't personally use any social media just because I'm really bad at it. I'm of the older generation that it's not as easy for me. I'd have to have my daughter teach me how to do it. But I know a lot of our younger therapists are doing things like Instagram and TikToks, and that brings a lot of attention to the
Mhm.
practice. Using sites like Psychology Today, that's maybe the biggest one, where you have online profiles where people are going to look for therapists, because most people don't know where to start. So they're going to Google therapists in my area, and they're going to come up with a couple of different pages where they can read profiles. That's going to help you get a little bit more exposure to clients too. But, in my experience, I would say probably plan on like 3 to 6 months before you're at a good level of clientele, before you feel like you're getting them and you're starting to kind of make a name for yourself. And then you start getting referrals from your clients too. So it does take time and it takes effort, but it also really depends on where you're starting.
Yeah. And I think once you specialize, you can then get a lot of referrals from other therapists who don't specialize in what you
Yeah,
specialize. Yeah.
absolutely. Yep. A couple of specialties that will like guarantee you clientele is getting more specialty in eating disorders, in ADHD, and then trauma. Being a well-known trauma therapist will get you a lot of referrals as well.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think with the oncoming of AI, how do you feel like AI will replace or not replace the social work field and careers?
Mm, I love that question. This is a this business is a people business, and people will always need people.
Mhm.
I definitely have clients who go to ChatGPT and they'll come to me and they'll be like, "Hey, ChatGPT told me I should talk to you about this." Like they'll find some level of skill building and coping and validation through AI. But I also, from what I hear through experience in my office, is that they get really tired of it because AI is like over validating and doesn't like challenge you the way that you would in real time with a real person who's like tracking and noticing your patterns and starting to like point those things out and doing that in a way that you just can't replace with AI. This is a people business, and like I said, the most effective part of therapy is that therapeutic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I think AI will try really hard, and there will be some people who will find that a lot safer than talking to a person. But generally, this is the work of human connection, and and honoring that and being a person that keeps that connection will be something really valuable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in my experience, like in the hospital, as we know, if someone's losing their family member in the hospital, talking to someone over FaceTime, or even let's say they try and put robots in there at some point, like that's not going to comfort anyone. They need a real human being to be there with them and give them support. And yeah, I think that it's not something I thought about when I was choosing the social work career was, oh, this career will outlast AI and all the technology that comes. It won't be replaced. But now, it is kind of I think a little bit of job security, because robots can't replace real humans. So
No,
yeah.
no, and I think most people know that, and most people recognize that. I'm married to an engineer, and AI can absolutely replace an engineer, which is a little bit scary. But when it comes to social work, this is the business of people.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, our last question, which I think is a question that a lot of students and new grads have, if you're willing to share, is kind of pay transparency. I don't think there's a lot of pay transparency when it comes to the field of social work. I know when I was in school, everyone said, "Oh, you're going into social work. You're definitely not doing it for the money," which personally I think there is good money to be had in social work.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're willing to share kind of what, just generals, nothing specific, but what your pay increase has looked like, your pay scale has looked like from like a new grad to where you are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just kind of give you pay ranges that I'm seeing and that I'm kind of experiencing too. But in private practice, you will start anywhere from $40 per session, and it's often per session. It's pretty rare to find a therapist job that has any kind of insurance benefits or anything. This is mostly per session and contract work. So a lot of new clinicians are getting offered anywhere from 40 to 60 starting, and then usually get a pay raise with licensing. And every now and then you'll find a clinic who's willing to pay out like 60% of what they're bringing in. So say that the insurance is willing to pay like 130 for a session, they'll pay 60% of that to the therapist. So, and that can vary. Like sometimes you'll get an insurance company willing to pay like 220 for a session,
Right.
or 60. So you get a big range in what they're paying back. So depending on the office, you're going to start a little lower, and then once you get licensed, you usually get a pay increase, and then it's kind of rare to get a pay increase from there. That's where a lot of people start to explore branching out on their own, where they want to start getting the full like payback from whatever is being paid out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's private practice. Medical social work is anywhere from like $30 an hour or a visit to, I've heard, 70. So there's a bigger range with medical social work, and it depends on the company and the team. Like in hospice, they just pay out like a lump sum of what they're willing to pay towards this patient, and they divide it between the physician, the nurse, the CNA, the medical social worker, and the chaplain. So every company is different in what percentage they're willing to pay out. So yeah, there's quite a range, and once you hit the higher range, you're not likely to go a whole lot higher. You're kind of like capped at that. So that's why you see a lot of social workers having a second job or doing something on their own, because they need that money. They need to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important, those that are listening as well, to know, if you don't know what contract work is, basically you're not a W-2 employee like when you go to normal jobs, which means you have to hold your taxes outside and pay those taxes separately. Your job does not pay those and take those out for you from what you're paid from. So that's, I think, for new social workers as well.
Yeah. I think the current licensing standard is for a new social worker and for a new LMFT or MFT, is that they have to work under a clinic that does W-2.
Oh, okay.
But don't quote me on that, but I think that's the current standard. It changes every year with legislation, but most new social workers need that supervision under a W-2.
That makes sense. Yeah, and then they can't work as a contract 1099 until they've reached those 3,000 or 4,000 hours.
Yeah, once you're fully licensed, you can do whatever you want with that license during your own.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. Anything else that you feel like would be helpful for people to know in regards to therapy or any of your roles in social work?
I would say that if you are coming out as a new grad in social work, expect your clinical skills, like you've had the training, you've done a lot of practice, but expect them to be a little bit behind what maybe a marriage and family therapist grad or a clinical mental health grad is having, because they just did clinical work. As a social worker, we're like more generally trained. We're trained in a lot of research and advocacy, and we look at macro type things. We have a lot of generalist training, which is so valuable to that piece of variety that we're very interchangeable in different areas of this field. But in the clinical area, that's where those 3,000 hours are really important, because those clinical skills need a lot of repetition and a lot of practice. And other therapists in the field that have a different background have done a little bit more of that. They're coming out a little bit more skilled in the modalities, a little bit more practiced in the clinical area. So just expect to need the practice, but also appreciate the training that social work has given you, because it makes you very adaptable in lots of areas. Whereas with marriage and family therapy and clinical mental health, they can only do clinical work in the setting as a therapist. But as a CSW and LCSW, we have like a range of different things that we can do there. So it's a valuable profession in that way, but you will find yourself just a little bit behind in the clinical side of things. You'll feel it because you'll be wondering every day if you're doing it right. But just trust the process and practice your skills, and you will get there. You'll be just as competent and just as specialized and just as effective as every other therapist out there.
That's perfect. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Social Work HQ. If this conversation was helpful, please leave a comment. If you want to hear of specific careers or jobs, definitely comment them down below. I will read them and try and get a social worker on the channel that can explain a little bit more about that job. And you can definitely find free resources and other options down below to help you navigate the social work career, graduating, interviews, resumes, and templates like that. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.